UFC 293 Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland. Welcome to another UFC prediction and analysis video presented by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks. Harris flying solo today, but the show must go on. We are going to give you fight by fight breakdown, fight by fight predictions from that betting perspective specifically. Want to let you know who's worth the value, which underdogs that have a best shot at winning, which favorites maybe you want to avoid, and some parlay action towards the end of the video as well. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel at Boxing MMA Picks. Would definitely appreciate that. Please hit the thumbs up on this video as well. And when it's all said and done, we're going to want to hear from you in the comments. For this UFC pay-per-view event 293, it is taking place in Sydney, Australia. We have 12 fights overall, 7 of them on the prelims, 5 of them on the main card. So let's get started right away with fight number 1 of our prelims. We have Kevin Jousset versus Kiefer Crosbie, 2 newcomers making their debut on a pay-per-view event card. So anything can happen. That right away will tell you that. For Jousset, like I mentioned, UFC debut, he's on a 3-fight winning streak. More of a patient style of striking from Kevin Jousset. Constantly trying to make reads, constantly trying to get his opponents to bite, fights at the edge of his range. Going to be sort of that true technical style of striking because he is a city kickboxing product. So, of course, you want to think about guys like Israel Adesanya, guys like Dan Hooker from the same camp. So you can almost expect a signature style of striking, dare I say. Don't really think much of his ground game. I have seen him land a takedown here and there, but really nothing special with that top control. Takedown defense doesn't look like it's anything special either. Really, again, just with that striking style, trying to get the opponents to bite, fighting at the edge of your range, sneaking in those calf kicks. Again, everything that we would expect from a city kickboxing product. He is taking on Kiefer Crosbie. UFC debut for him as well. He's on a 2-fight winning streak. His last win was a knockout versus Alex Cowboy Oliveira. So that lets you know that he should be UFC ready. His striking style will favor a bit more of a boxing style more than anything else. Good jab. His hands he stays light on the feet, I should say. Likes to come in close distance. Good level of activity from Kiefer Crosbie. I have seen him land takedowns as well, but I do believe that he's a striker more than anything. Good fight on paper, good looking fight on paper, I should say. 2 strikers, although they have very different styles. 2 strikers from what I've seen with good technique, from what I've seen with pretty good IQ as well. I think it's going to be a close fight in either direction. Whether you're going for the underdog, whether you're going for the favorite, I think that both guys are going to have opportunities. Now, personally, I'm leaning on the underdog side. I'm leaning on the side of Kiefer Crosbie. And the reason for that primarily is because I prefer his style of striking more. I think that with his style, he will likely be the striker that's going to try to close distance, that, will try to push the pace. And I think that's going to help him in the eyes of the judges. When I look at Jousset's record, 8 wins. One of those is a majority win. One of those is a split decision win. And of his 2 losses, one of those is a split decision loss. So that's telling me that 30% of your fights are split or majority. That tells me that you find yourself in close fights pretty often. So I do think this fight will be close, but again, stylistically, with the striking, with the perceived pressure, with the perceived activity, I actually have the underdog Kiefer Crosbie pulling this one out. So I'm going to go with the underdog Kiefer Crosbie in that case. Second fight of our prelims, Shane Young versus Gabriel Miranda. Shane Young is on a 3-fight losing streak now. He lost to Blake Bilder back in April. Look for a lot of fakes and feints in his style, constantly trying to get his opponents to attack and set up his own attack. Active jab hand, good jab hand at that. He has decent timing, good controlled pressure. His activity could be a bit higher, despite what we see with the numbers there. Just 0.6 takedowns per fight at 18% accuracy, so don't really expect him to be effective there. Also, just 65% takedown defense, so not really the best in that regard either. He has given up 3 takedowns total in his last 2 fights, for an example. Gabriel Miranda, on the other hand, it's been a year since his last fight. That was a knockout loss to Benoit Saint Denis. No slouch there. He's pretty solid. We'll talk about him later. A lot of movement, a lot of feinting action on the feet. He almost looks hesitant to strike at times, but not afraid to engage at all. I wouldn't say striking is his strength. I do think what his strength is, 15 of his 16 wins are via submission. So he's going to want to bring the fight to the mat. He's a submission specialist. He can land takedowns. Doesn't really have the best takedown defense, but he's one of those fighters that, he'll even pull guard if he has to, right? So this is an interesting fight to me. I think you're looking at a clash of styles. Shane Young, a bit more of a striker. Miranda being the ground fighter, of course. I'm not too high on either fighter. Like, this is one of those fights that you can't feel confident in the choice you're making just because each of these guys can be unreliable. I don't know if either of them are UFC level, but for this fight, I'm going to make another underdog pick. I am leaning toward Gabriel Miranda. I would say that the gap that I think exists with the striking in favor of Shane Young, it's a smaller gap than the gap that I think exists with the ground game in favor of Gabriel Miranda. I think what's especially key for this fight, like I mentioned before, Shane Young does not have the greatest takedown defense. Shane Young is not the most active striker. So that tells me that Gabriel Miranda should be able to close distance, should be able to land takedowns, should be able to work that top control as well. And I think that Miranda should be able to do it for all 3 rounds. So not a confident pick by any means, but stylistically, I think this is a bad matchup for Shane Young. And I think that the underdog, Gabriel Miranda, will get it done. Fight number 3 of our prelims, I should say, end of the early prelims. We're looking at Blood Diamond versus Charlie Radtke. Blood Diamond UD lost to Orion Koski. That was 14 months ago. He's 0-2 in the UFC now. We know he's a city kickboxing product as well. So unsurprisingly, he's a kickboxer, a bit unorthodox. He throws big, misses big sometimes. He can kind of clean up that technique a little bit, which I'm surprised that it's not already clean with who he trains with. But nonetheless, he does have good kicks, does have a nasty high kick, good left lead hand as well. We know that fighters are going to try to capitalize on the ground with the ground game against any city kickboxing product, really, but with Blood Diamond as well. To that point, he has 69% takedown defense. He has given up 4 takedowns in his 2 UFC fights, so you're not overly confident in a number like that in terms of his ability to defend takedowns. Grappling wise, takedown defense wise, again, just doesn't really have it at all. And that is a weakness of his. Charlie Radtke is making his UFC debut. He's on a 4-fight winning streak. Looking at the CFFC welterweight champ, he's going to fight at range. Patient, picks his shots well, decent level of activity. Looks like he's got good power as well. Doesn't really wind up big on his shots, doesn't really go out of control, but nearly half of his wins are via KO, TKO. He has shown me some ground IQ, really, in just sort of scrambling situations, whether he's trying to keep off of his back or whether he's trying to reverse position. But in terms of offense, takedowns don't really appear to be a part of his game at all. So I think a few things in this fight. I think that this is probably Blood Diamond's last chance in the UFC. I think that he's going to be fighting for his job here. That creates a lot of variables in this fight in and of itself. Seeing Blood Diamond as the underdog, it doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, again, he's been pretty lackluster at best in his time in the UFC thus far. I think, however, it's been a bit circumstantial. Just looking at who he has been taking on, he has been taking on opponents that have that wrestling component to their game, that have used takedowns against him, right? So if we take a look at his 2 fights, Orion Koski, we know he's going to go for takedowns. Jeremiah Wells, we know, has that wrestling ability as well. So I think some of it has been circumstantial. I think for this fight, I don't see Charlie Radtke as being that sort of takedown threat at all. So I'm anticipating that this one stays on the feet throughout the fight. Now, don't get me wrong. Radtke, to me, is the better fighter. I think I can also rely on Radtke to be more durable through the fight, even though we haven't seen him at this UFC level yet. But something is telling me this is going to be one of those fights where Blood Diamond finally manages to get it done. Blood Diamond has that knockout power. Radtke has been finished before. It will be a kickboxing fight from what I'm anticipating. And that, to me, makes it more likely that Blood Diamond gets that win that he needs. Fight-changing punch, maybe even an early stoppage, something that really is sort of momentum-based and goes in his favor. I think that he can have that ability as a pretty sizable underdog, and he's also going to be my pick, even though, again, I recognize Radtke is the better fighter in this one. But I'm going to go with the underdog again. So starting with 3 underdogs, Blood Diamond is going to be my pick to end off those early prelims. Fight number 4, we're looking at Nasrat Haqparast versus Landon Quiñones. Haqparast unanimous decision win over John Makdessi back in September of last year. He's introduced as a Muay Thai kickboxer. He's going to show more of a boxing style in the octagon than anything else. Sharp southpaw, good counterpuncher, likes to stalk and control pace, cuts off the ring pretty well. He can be just as effective fighting from the outside rather than coming forward, not afraid to engage with his opponents. So you're looking at a fighter with, pretty good IQ on the feet, good high IQ combinations, good fakes and feints, solid usage of jabs, and a good ability to keep the fight on the feet with his 78% takedown defense. For Landon Quiñones, he was on this past season of Ultimate Fighter. He lost to Jason Knight, I believe in the quarterfinals, if I'm not mistaken. He has an active jab hand, starts a bit slow, starts patient, gets his reads, tries to get his opponents to bite, consistent pace, consistent activity. I do like his overall movement and just what he shows, technically. I think he picks his shots pretty well. I think he's very controlled. Like I said, that striking IQ is definitely there. And I have seen him land takedowns. So I think he's a pretty, solid fighter who, with a few more fights under his belt, can potentially be effective in the UFC. With all that said, I don't think this is a good matchup for Landon Quiñones at all. I do think Quiñones is a solid fighter. Like I said, still just 27 years old. He can be one of those fighters that are effective when they're 30. But Haqparast, in my opinion, way too experienced here. In terms of UFC experience, has way more. He has more fights in the UFC than Quiñones has total fights. So that alone should tell you, that experience alone should be the deciding factor in this one. I think Haqparast is a big favorite for a reason. I think it'll be a good striking battle, but Haqparast has that higher level of intensity. Quiñones can land takedowns, but Haqparast is good at defending them. And again, I trust Haqparast to be the more experienced fighter in there, making better decisions, making better adjustments, being able to pull out the win relatively easily. So Nasrat Haqparast will be my pick. Fight number 5 of our prelims, Jamie Mullarkey versus John Makdessi. Mullarkey lost to Muhammad Naimov back in June. He's got a decent jab. He has good head movement, good level changes, just good movement in general, really. Very serviceable style of stand-up. His boxing combinations look improved. His calf kick looks improved. His striking defense looks improved. And really good with those counter punches. Got to respect that power as well from Jamie Mullarkey. 10 of his 16 wins are via KO, TKO. And he also has the ground game. He has the wrestling. He lands almost 3 takedowns per fight. Stylistically, he's eventually going to shoot for those takedowns. And he's okay with playing the clinch game against the cage rather than forcing a takedown attempt. Also, don't really expect any cardio issues with Jamie Mullarkey. He does have moments where he's not the most durable, though. And that's probably the biggest red flag for him. When you look at his record at 16-6, unfortunately, 4 of those 6 losses have been via KO, TKO. So you're definitely going to have to watch out for that. Taking on John Makdessi, who can land that bomb on you, right? John Makdessi, unanimous decision loss to Nasrat Haqparast. That was September of last year. He's introduced as a striker. So he, going up against the weak chin could definitely be an opportunity for him. More of a counter striker style of fighter, though. His activity isn't always the highest. He's way more on the technique side of things rather than the brawling exchange side of things. And he's one of those fighters that sort of starts slow, but very consistent in his pace, very consistent in his technique, very good takedown defense as well. Although he was taken down twice in his last fight, statistically, he does sit at 85%. Now, I'm going to be honest here. I really like this spot for Jamie Mullarkey. I can keep things short by saying I expect the same style of fight as John Makdessi's last fight versus Nasrat Haqparast. I anticipate Mullarkey having the better movement, fighting more effectively from distance. He's the taller fighter, the longer fighter, the faster fighter. I think he's going to be able to outpoint John Makdessi throughout the fight, and I think he is going to be able to implement takedowns when needed, despite, again, the 85% on the side of John Makdessi. To me, Makdessi just isn't active enough nor explosive enough to be threatening against Jamie Mullarkey. For John Makdessi, half of his wins are via KO TKO. So again, like I said at the top, he is able to land that bomb, right? He is likely to be the fighter controlling the center of the octagon. But stylistically, I feel like that bomb is sort of his only chance to win the fight. I don't think his activity is going to be able to keep up for this one. Whereas for Jamie Mullarkey, he's able to win on the scorecards pretty much everywhere in this fight based on how I'm anticipating it. So I'm going with Jamie Mullarkey, knowing that he's going to fight for your money, where his chin is going to be the only thing that could fail. I'm considering whether this is a fight that I would want to parlay or not. So Jamie Mullarkey, I like him in this spot. I think he gets the job done. Fight number 6 of our prelims, Jack Jenkins versus Chepe Mariscal. For Jack Jenkins, split decision win over Jamal Emmers back in June. Now, really important to note for that fight, pretty much everyone had Jamal Emmers winning that fight. But what we know about Jack Jenkins, switch stance fighter, good movement, good calf kick. He's patient, he's controlled, he has pretty solid boxing. He uses his jab well, has a pretty sharp calf kick, good combinations. He's consistently trying to move forward, so that's going to look good in the eyes of the judges. Doesn't really force the pressure by any means. Really composed as a fighter. A good ground game as well, good timing on his takedowns, position improvements, consistent ground and pound, good top control. Cardio shouldn't be an issue. So, on paper, Jack Jenkins definitely has the tools. He's going up against Chepe Mariscal, who has a unanimous decision win over Trevor Peek back in June. That was his debut. A pretty solid striker, mixes it up really well. Calf kick looks pretty solid. He's going to give his opponents a lot of different looks, right? From the types of strikes he's throwing to throwing combinations effectively to fighting from distance to being explosive with his movement coming forward. So very unorthodox look sort of that he gives you, and he is a dangerous fighter. Now, I mentioned that Jack Jenkins' last fight, he was pretty much gifted a decision, in addition to being in front of his home crowd in Australia. These are things that you got to watch out for. If this fight is close, it's more than likely going to swing Jack Jenkins' way, right? So this is someone that the UFC appears to be kind of investing in for these international type of events. Now, fortunately for Jack Jenkins, either way, I actually don't anticipate this fight being close. I think that Mariscal has some value as an underdog because I think he can take the fight to Jenkins. I think he can force a pace on Jenkins, make it a back and forth fight, and then at that point, anything can happen. But I don't think that's likely to happen. What I think is much more likely is, Jenkins being the much more polished striker, and that being very important for this fight. I can see Jack Jenkins even getting a finish in this fight. This fight should stay on the feet, where again, Jack Jenkins, higher level striker, more polished striker, should get the win. I can't say super easily, but I do feel pretty confident about Jack Jenkins getting the win here, because even if the fight is close, it's probably going to swing in his favor anyway. So Jack Jenkins is going to be my pick for that fight. Now let's get to the final fight of our prelims. We're looking at Carlos Ulberg versus Da Un Jung. For Ulberg, 4-fight winning streak. He beat Ihor Poteria back in May. You're looking at a high-level kickboxer when you're looking at Carlos Ulberg. He's a multiple-time kickboxing champion. He's light on the feet. Has a good, quick, accurate, striking in general. Good, diverse striking in general. Good movement. Good combinations. A lot of fakes and feints. A lot of setup jabs, things like that. He really knows what he's doing to find his shot. Good power as well. Sharp calf kick as well. Now, in terms of red flags, cardio has been a bit of a concern for him, but he looks like he's becoming more patient, more methodical, whereas cardio tank is being able to last him. However, another red flag for Carlos Ulberg is that he's been a bit chinny in the past. So let's definitely see what happens here against Da-Un Jung, who is on a 2-fight losing streak. He lost to Devin Clark back in February. Patient stand-up, good hands. I think he's more of a boxer than anything else. Cuts the ring off well, good fakes and feints, good in and out movement, good striking diversity, good combinations, good counters. He can also take the fight to the ground, right? 2 takedowns per fight, though not really an active part of his game if you just sort of watch his fights. So that number is a bit inflated in my opinion. He does have good takedown defense though at 80%. I don't think that'll matter. I actually think this is a really good spot for Carlos Ulberg. I think just like Carlos Ulberg's last fight, I think he's going to get the style of fight that he's looking for here, right? So this fight, in my opinion, for sure will stay on the feet. Both guys are very solid in the striking department, but Carlos Ulberg just should be a lot better in this situation. Where Da-Un Jung has value is that he does have power. He is more than capable as a striker. And as I mentioned, Ulberg has been chinny in his past fights. Jung could absolutely catch him. But I think what's going to work well for Ulberg here is that Jung doesn't really have the highest level of activity. Because of that, I pretty much see it as unlikely that Da-Un Jung lands that fight-changing punch. On top of that, we've seen Da-Un Jung finished before. So I do think that Ulberg can do the same thing. Actually, an early finish wouldn't surprise me either. But I do like Carlos Ulberg a lot in this spot. Let's move on to our main card. We have 5 fights overall on the main card. Fight number 1 is going to be Tyson Pedro versus Anton Turkalj. For Tyson Pedro, he lost to Modestas Bukauskas back in February. Pedro is pretty technical as a striker. He does throw a lot of fakes and feints. He does have solid movement. He's especially good at fighting from range. Good calf kick. He can be explosive. He has a 100% finish rate amongst his 9 wins. He's physically strong. He can play that clinch game as well. He's good on the ground, right? Don't really expect takedowns to be an active part of his game, but he has shown me the ability to land takedowns. He has good top control. He has some grappling ability from what I'm seeing. And really just an overall solid fighter, right? One thing you have to note with him is cardio is not the best. He will definitely start to slow down as the fight progresses. Now for Anton Turkalj, unanimous decision loss to Vitor Petrino in his last fight. That was back in March. I would say he's average on the feet. He does try to use all of his weapons, punches, kicks, knees, elbows, things like that. But I wouldn't really say his striking ability is particularly threatening by any means. Where his strength lies is that he does want to bring the fight to the ground. He's willing to chain those takedown attempts together, try to get the back. We see those takedown numbers there. I mean, obviously inflated. He doesn't have a lot of UFC fights, but it does speak to his ability or his wanting to look for that ground game. If he does get you down, if he does take your back, he does have good top control. He uses ground and pound pretty effectively to open things up, and then he's going to look for those submission attempts from there. In my opinion, I actually don't think either fighter here is a particularly high-level fighter. I think that both of them have paths to victory here. For Pedro, he should be the better striker, a bit cleaner in his technique. For Turkalj, he should have the ground game advantage, the fighter who can actually land takedowns and be a threat once he's on top and once he takes your back. Now, what's interesting here, I do think Pedro is the better fighter, all things considered. I definitely wanted to go with Pedro when I saw this matchup, when I just saw the names against each other. But when I see just 52% takedown defense for Tyson Pedro, I worry about this matchup for him. I think that Anton Turkalj has it in him as as a pick'em type of fight where this fight can go in either direction. I think he has it in him to get it done. Pedro is not really the most active striker, so I anticipate Turkalj being able to land takedowns where Pedro doesn't really have the best ground game, especially off of his back. I'm envisioning, several minutes of top control for Turkalj throughout this fight. I think he's going to be able to pull it off as an underdog. I think this is going to be potentially a parlay killer for a lot of people. A lot of people are going to want to go with the hometown guy in Pedro. He has 70% of the vote on a Tapology. So I think this is one that you got to be very careful about. And we see that at some point Turkalj started off as an underdog. He is now in sort of a pick'em situation, but potentially the slight favorite. So that kind of lets you know that I'm potentially onto something here, and this may not be the best matchup for Tyson Pedro. So again, be very careful with that. And my pick will be Anton Turkalj. Second fight of our main card, we're looking at Justin Tafa versus Austen Lane. Now, this fight may look very familiar to you because this is actually a rematch of their fight in June. So just a few months ago, that fight ended fairly quickly in a no contest after an accidental eye poke. That fight never really got a chance to get started, so I don't think there's really much to learn from it for this rematch. Now, Justin Tafa, he's going to be one of those one-dimensional heavyweights, all things considered. 6 wins, 6 of them via KO, TKO, 4 of them in round 1. So we know that he has super big power, sneaky short hook. He's capable of that head kick, pretty good as a counterpuncher as well. Very flat-footed, doesn't really offer much else otherwise. Does have some ground IQ, but that won't matter in this one. Austen Lane, tall, long, pretty quick as a heavyweight with active movement. Look for him to use his reach to his full advantage. He's going to fight at range. He's going to have a 6-inch reach advantage. In this one, he's going to be 6 inches taller as well. I'd say very much a striker. Long jab, long kicks. Doesn't have the best takedown defense, though again, shouldn't matter in this fight. Not afraid to go at it with his opponents, right? Kind of brawl style, and that's kind of what initiated the eye poke. So, when I think about this rematch, I think I pretty much feel the same way as I did back in June, right? I'm looking at a fight between 2 strikers where Tafa is the better striker to me. I think he's more capable. I think he's more competent. I can especially see a huge counterpunch opportunity for him that should put Lane out. I think Lane does have a shot. I've seen pretty decent cardio out of him. He moves well, and this is a heavyweight fight at the end of the day. If there was anything that I learned in the 30 seconds that they fought back in June, was that Justin Tafa should be able to close distance pretty quickly, where in a few more minutes he could potentially land a knockout. So Justin Tafa is going to be my pick. I think it's going to be a sloppy fight. I think Justin Tafa is going to land, and I think it's going to be lights out for Austen Lane. Justin Tafa is my pick on this one. Third fight of our main card, we're looking at Manel Kape versus Felipe dos Santos. Manel Kape is on a 3-fight winning streak. He beat David Dvorak back in December. Southpaw, switch stance fighter, good striking speed, good striking accuracy, great timing, great striking IQ as well, and as well as good counterpunching. He's really patient. Good movement, fights effectively at range. He'll use fakes, feints, level changes, things like that. And he's pretty explosive, especially when he commits to that offense. He can really be a problem. He's going to use that explosiveness to shoot for takedowns when he needs to, I should say, but he is much more likely to keep it standing. That said, been a little prone to giving up takedowns, just 69% takedown defense, and he did give up 2 takedowns in his last fight. So be wary of that if you're on the betting side of Manel Kape, especially as a big favorite here, because he is going up against Felipe dos Santos, who is part of the Shoot the Box team. If you don't know the Shoot the Box team, you should. Charles Oliveira, Alan Nascimento, Daniel Santos, Elvis Brenner, those types of fighters, that type of style. Dos Santos is making his UFC debut here, expect that type of striking style from him. So expect a style that's very dynamic, very active, pretty aggressive, good kicks, hands are solid. Expect a lot of combinations out of Felipe dos Santos, and I have seen him, unsurprisingly, be able to land takedowns. Plus 3 of his 7 wins are via submission. I do think that Felipe dos Santos has a bright future ahead of him. Still just 22 years old. He can definitely be a wild card in this fight. The dynamic striking can be tricky. It's that Charles Oliveira type of style that has done better against guys that we perceive as better strikers. So I think that Dos Santos can be a bit of a wild card in that respect. Dos Santos can potentially land takedowns on Manel Kape, who does not have the greatest takedown defense. But I'll be honest, I like Manel Kape a lot in this spot. Unsurprisingly, as a big favorite, I do think he is for real in terms of being able to become, a top 5, top 7 fighter in this division. I think his UFC experience will be meaningful for this fight. I think his striking is more polished while being just as dynamic, if not more so. Right. So with that cleaner striking, I have seen Felipe dos Santos get touched before while getting a bit reckless. And I can see Manel Kape doing some damage throughout this fight in those types of situations. So Manel Kape will be my pick here. My gut is telling me to potentially be weary of blindly adding this on a parlay. So I'm actually going to give that official caution. Maybe be a little careful with betting this one. Not a fan of huge favorites. And again, Dos Santos can be tricky, but Manel Kape should be the much better fighter. He should show it. It should be relatively problem-free, though it will be a tough fight. Let's look at fight number 4. Let's look at our co-main event of the evening, Tai Tuivasa versus Alexander Volkov. Tuivasa has 2 losses in a row now. He lost to Sergey Pavlovich back in December. He's considered a street fighter, so that kind of tells you all you need to know about him. He's tough. He's not afraid to engage. His stand-up is pretty solid, pretty good. Usually controls center of the octagon, although we didn't see that in his last fight. Probably won't see it in this fight. Good jab, good overhand right, great usage of the calf kicks. He stays pretty patient, maintains a decent pace, and won't really gas himself out too easily here. Alexander Volkov has won now 2 times in a row after beating Alexander Romanov back in March. He likes to come forward. He likes to put the pressure on you. Good jab, smooth and quick with his combinations as well. He's going to use all of his height and reach advantages that he typically has over his opponents. Unsurprisingly, another reach advantage for this one, 5 inches in height, 5 inches in reach. The kicks are an active part of his game. He has a very effective calf kick. He's willing to engage once he does close distance, so he does have that ability to get really nasty with it, and has a pretty decent ability to keep the fight in his wheelhouse, to keep the fight standing. He has 73% takedown defense, although that stat to me will not be relevant for this fight. I'll start with this. It absolutely makes sense why Alexander Volkov is the favorite here. I think he holds pretty much all key advantages in this fight. I think he has the striking advantage. I think he has the wrestling advantage, the grappling advantage, the durability advantage. I think he has the advantage virtually everywhere in this fight. Tai Tuivasa, to me, at this level of heavyweight, really is one of those Derek Lewis type of heavyweights, in that, he is dangerous at all times, despite his opponents possessing more skill than him, more times than not. Like I said, Volkov, better overall striker, better able to avoid takedowns, more experienced, more durable. Yes, he does have 10 losses, but only 2 of those losses via KO TKO as a heavyweight. Very impressive. Technically you're looking at technically speaking, you're looking at a pretty good value pick in Alexander Volkov, but just, I don't know what it is. UFC co-main events, given the moment, given the location, my gut is telling me to avoid Volkov from a betting perspective. In fact, despite analytically thinking that Volkov has pretty much every advantage in this fight, my gut is telling me that somehow Tai Tuivasa gets it done. Has that shoey chug a beer moment with the home crowd. It's not often I make these kind of gut calls that go completely against my analysis, but this is going to be one of those times, right? So don't necessarily follow me on this, but I do feel that Tai Tuivasa somehow finds a way to get the knockout that he's looking for, have the moment that he's looking for, keep his name relevant, and set it up for, set up a main event at a Feature Sydney card or something along those lines. So I don't know. I don't know. Doesn't make too much sense, but I think somehow, some way, Tai Tuivasa will pull this one out. Moving on to the main event of the evening, middleweight title fight, I should say, between Israel Adesanya and Sean Strickland. Adesanya beat Alex Pereira back in April, as we all know, to regain that middleweight title. Masterful striker, good distance control, the pace, the combinations, the ability to draw his opponents in. He can pick his opponents apart really with his striking. We know he's super consistent. We know he's super patient. We know he moves really well. The highest level of kickboxing ability. His takedown defense has been proven to be more than reliable enough for him. 77% on paper, but that was negatively impacted when he moved up in weight. So especially as a middleweight, very good at keeping it on the feet. Sean Strickland did beat Abus Magomedov back in July. He is a good, consistent striker. He stays in your face. He marches you down. Constant pressure. We know his hands stay controlled. Really good jab, good counter punching, good timing. Pretty sharp with his combinations as well. We know that he does have a bit of a ground game, right? He can land takedowns. He has shown pretty good top position, good clinch work as well. Just one takedown per fight. Really good accuracy at that. So don't expect him to be too active with the takedowns, but when he goes for it, he is likely to get it. 84% takedown defense to go along with that. And we know that Sean Strickland is a cardio machine. He definitely won't get tired. I'll say this, though, not too much time needed on this one. Adesanya, the biggest favorite of the card. I think it's fair to say that Israel Adesanya is pretty much a lock in this fight. Now, stylistically, Adesanya, huge benefit with that technical style of striking, with his ability to control the pace, to manage the distance well against Sean Strickland's more sort of basic style of striking. For this fight, really look no further than Sean Strickland versus Alex Pereira for as long as that fight lasted. And even let's say even outside the knockout. Outside of that knockout, Strickland was the guy coming forward, but wasn't really able to do much with that against more of a pure kickboxing style that was outlanding, that was fighting effectively from distance. Adesanya really should outpoint Sean Strickland at any given point here and make it look pretty easy. And I don't think it's ever really going to be too threatening for Israel Adesanya. So Adesanya, lock him up. He's going to get it done. He's going to retain his title. That one's pretty easy there. Let's take it to Vegas. Let's consider some underdogs. Let's consider some parlay picks. And let's see where we're going here. Now, the past couple of weeks in the UFC have been favorite heavy, but I think we are going to see some changes on this card. There are a few underdogs that I think have really good value. I think Kiefer Crosbie has some good value. Again, I think his striking style is just a bit more pressuring than Kevin Jousset's, and that could potentially get it done for him. I think Gabriel Miranda has value as an underdog. Again, he has that ground game approach. Shane Jung, not the most active striker, not really able to defend those takedowns. So I can see Miranda winning a few rounds in that sense. I think those will probably be my two sort of underdogs that have the best shot at winning. We know outside of that, there's value across the board, right? Felipe dos Santos could be dangerous. Tai Tuivasa could be dangerous. Tyson Pedro, that's anyone's fight. So there is value all over this card in terms of trying to call some underdogs, but I do think your two best shots would be Kiefer Crosbie or Gabriel Miranda. In terms of favorites, since it is Harris flying solo for this card, I'm going to sort of give you two different plays I'm looking at. A strategy that I like to implement is sort of have my main parlay and then have a few fights that I add on to that for a bit more of a quote unquote lottery parlay. So I think, in terms of putting a few fights on a ticket that I think can get some good value, I like Jamie Mullarkey. I really like Jack Jenkins. And I like Carlos Ulberg. Now, those three fights, pretty good value, 2.86. So that means that $100 will return 286. For our bigger bettors, $250 will return a total of 715. Now, in terms of what I would potentially add to that to kind of beef it up a bit, although it would be a much smaller betting amount, I would add Israel Adesanya. I would add Nasrat Haqparast, and I would leave it at those two. Now, those 5 fights would be a 4.0, and I'll do a smaller wager on this one. That means that $25 will return a total of $100. For our bigger bettors, $100 will return a total of $400. So I think, again, there is that opportunity to kind of stagger your plays and play it in that way. And that's a way that I personally look at it when I'm trying to consider what I want to bet on. But let's officially end it there. This has been UFC UFC 293, Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland, presented by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks. Please make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel here at Boxing MMA Picks, and make sure that you comment. I want to hear from you. How do you feel about my parlays? How do you feel about my longer shot parlay? How do you feel about me calling Izzy a lock? What picks are you looking at? Again, just any and every conversation that you're looking to have, let that be known in the comments. But officially signing off, this has been UFC 293 full card prediction video presented by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks. Harris flying solo today, but either way, in our usual fashion, let's get this money.